Dave Luvison, an executive in residence at the Selinger School of Business and Management at Loyola University, Maryland. And it's my privilege to facilitate this conversation between Rizwan Mahmoodi of Wells Fargo and Jose Trinidad Lopez Camacho, one of our students here at Loyola. And we're going to be talking about banking today. And the purpose of this series that we've been recording as a sit down with Selinger is really designed to give students the opportunity to hear what successful people in business are saying about what they should be doing in their careers, how they should be preparing themselves, and what's going on in certain industries that might be of interest to them. So with that, Rizwan, thank you very much for joining us today. Would you mind giving us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and some of the things that you do in your role with Wells Fargo?
Sure. Thank you for having me, and great to meet you, Jose. So my name is Rizwan Mahmoodi, as Dave said. I'm currently working for Wells Fargo in their structured finance department, and I lead a team of developers, some that are in states across different locations, as well as work with a team that's out in India that supports our operations. Over my career, which I guess started back in 2005, so almost 16 years now, I started off at Chevy Chase Bank, which is now Capital One, as a teller, and then kind of grew out of that and moved on to as I was doing that job during my college years, and once I graduated, there was kind of a plethora of opportunities of which direction I wanted to go in within banking. So Wells was the choice that I made, and I'm very happy with that choice because over the last 15 years, I joined Wells in 2006. Over the last 15 years, I've had various different opportunities to play in different roles and different projects, as well as different products that have really helped me grow as a team member, as a leader, and given me a wide variety of different options for the future.
That's great, Rizwan. And if I could just ask, for those of us who may not be clear with what that is, when you say you're in the area of structured finance, what exactly does that entail?
So structured finance, most people can relate to obviously their homes that they live in, right? So all of us go to a bank to get a mortgage for our house. At some point, the way the general framework works is the banks then sell these mortgages off to investors, and these mortgages are packaged into a security. So our residential mortgage-backed security, or same thing in the commercial space, the commercial mortgage-backed security. And so they're structured into a product which is then sold to investors, and then there's a series of more senior notes or junior notes that the investors that are taking more risk or less risk buy different positions in that deal.
Wonderful. That sounds like a lot of responsibility. I mean, you're basically kind of dealing with what people have put their kind of lock, stock, and barrel in, right? Until
yeah, home. And there's various different roles and this is a niche within the larger field of banking, right? So even within this niche, there's various different roles. So there's the front end role of kind of creating the absolute front end of selling the mortgages to the buyer, the homeowner, right? And then there's the front end also of the deal, kind of structuring the deal and putting the deal together and finding the investors. So my role and where I've been in my career is kind of more after the closing date, where things then get passed on from the investors and the issuer kind of and the underwriter kind of come together, and everyone's agreed on different structures and positions within the deal. And once they've sold it off, then it comes to our side of the world, where corporate trust services is one of the players that steps in to play trustee services on these deals for the life of the deal. So corporate trust is the division of Wells Fargo that I'm in currently and have been for the last 15 years.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for that background. And sounds like you're doing a tremendous job. Certainly, it sounds like there's a lot of responsibility, but also a lot of interesting challenges that we have.
Since fintech companies have been, or there has been a greater amount of them being founded, how might bank relationships change or the work environment change in the future with such new financial technologies?
So when we think about fintech companies, just for everyone's benefit that may be listening, so these are companies like PayPal or Square or Venmo or Cash App, right? So they're kind of, they don't have the brick and mortar presence. They're more online based financial services that are out there. So I feel like they complement each other in a way, right? So at some point, you're always going to need a brick and mortar store. But the fintech companies are also challenging the big players that are out there of upping their game on the technology side, right? So whether it be technology to process things faster, or if you put a home loan application in and that, you know, streamlines through the whole process and there's less manual input that you have to do and it connects to your bank account and your credit cards and your credit report and pulls everything in automatically versus you have to provide everything, right? So it's really kind of, the fintech companies, I think, are challenging the big banks that are there, that have been there, to really up their technology game. But at the same token, I feel like the big banks have a presence from the brick and mortar perspective that is necessary that the fintech companies just don't have. So there's a good relationship where I personally will say, like, I work for Wells Fargo, I have a bank with Wells Fargo, I have a credit card with Wells Fargo, my mortgage is with Wells Fargo, but I also do still use PayPal and Square and Cash App and other things, right? So and I think you know, so these companies, I feel like they may have more of a good relationship going forward, where one is challenging the other to kind of continuously upping their game. What I do see kind of potentially as a casualty, and there's a lot that's been written about this already, is potentially the smaller banks or the community banks that don't have as much capital, right, to compete at that level, to invest in technology that much. They potentially could be the ones that suffer with this competition that would be going on with the big banks and the fintechs that are out there.
Oh, and kind of a follow-up question. So what are the main changes that you would see happening to brick and mortar locations with new fintech companies?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the banks have already been doing this, where they're reducing the number of stores that they have out there, the branches that they have out there. So there will be consolidation, right? So you won't see a branch at every corner. Maybe, you know, if in a bigger town, you may see a few instead of a few on every street, right? So like even where I live, I know it, like within 5 minutes of me, not even, there's like 3 or 4 Bank of America locations, right? At some point there would be consolidation, and that's consolidated since probably 10 years ago. 10 years ago there used to be more, right? So and I could say the same, you pick your big bank and you could say the same about any of them. It over time, and this has been happening over the last 5 or 10 years, they've slowly been consolidating some locations into a bigger branch in that area. And we'll probably see more and more of that as consumers need less and less of the traditional brick and mortar banking. Like, you know, if you look at the number of people that used to cash their check on a Friday 20 years ago versus the number of people that take their check to a bank today, it's a drastic reduction, right? So if you have the number of people that are going to a branch is reducing, then similarly over time you're going to need less, you know, staff that's serving those customers from a branch perspective, whether it be tellers or relationship managers or so on and so forth. You don't need as many of them, and the customer, if a consumer only needs to go maybe once every few months to a banking location, I may not mind driving 10 minutes, right? As opposed to if I was going every Friday, I want something that's like within, you know, a few minutes of my house. So I think the consumers, there's a trade-off. The less I need to use it, the more I'm willing to kind of go a little out of the way for it.
You know, if I can interject something
Yeah.
here, I didn't realize this. Over the weekend, I actually went to my bank. I live in Northern Virginia, and it's SunTrust, which will be or is in the process of becoming Truist. And I hadn't been to that branch in probably a year. And when I walked in, I found out that it was both a SunTrust and a BB&T branch. They had the teller counter sort of split in two, and you just said which one you were going on, and you got handled by different people. So what that suggested to me is that there's actually a lot of creativity going on in your industry that maybe we don't see because we think of banking as being sort of this traditional sort of thing. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think Capital One, if I'm remembering correctly, was the one who introduced the idea of like Capital One cafes, right? So they were trying to combine the idea of like a Starbucks and a bank, right? So which is like you come and hang out at this place, and the bank is just there in the background if you need it, type of thing. So if I'm remembering correctly, it was Capital One. But yeah, I think different. You know, if you again go back a decade or two, there was a lot of open a small branch within a grocery store, right? So that's where I started when I was a Chevy Chase at the time, which is now Capital One. They used to be in like a giant store. Every giant store would have a Chevy Chase Bank. I think now SunTrust has taken location in the giant stores that are in this area, but so they've kind of been evolving to meet the customers of where they are, right? So now that less and less people are, you can either order your groceries through Amazon or have Giant deliver it. Less people are going to the grocery stores even, right, over time. So I think we're just seeing that now it's really that third place, right? So that's what Capital One with the cafes is trying to go for, is that third place idea of some place between home and work. If you're going to hang out at a coffee store, make it that type of environment, it's we're there for you, and we'll meet you when you need it, right? So if you're kind of there sitting and you have an idea of, or something that you may need financing for, it's like, okay, there's someone in the background I can go talk to. So there's certainly excuse me, there's certainly innovation on that end, but there's also a lot of innovation on the or investment on the technology front, right? So majority again, if you look 10, 20 years ago, and don't quote me on these stats, but probably more people were banking on using what there was a transition from traditional in-person banking to then online banking on PCs, right? And now most people bank through their phone, right? So there's been a consistent evolution there as well. So I think you have to continue to meet people where they are and how they want to be met, and be flexible, and it should be convenient for the consumer, right? So that's really, as long as you can get a mix of that, you can get the consumer.
There you go. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. That is all the questions I have.
Actually, if I could ask sort of a follow-up on that. Thank you, Jose. I know we've had some conversations, Rizwan, about some of the skills that students should be cultivating, and I know we talk about some of the general skills like communication skills and critical thinking skills and team building skills and those kinds of things. But you and I have also had occasion where we've talked about things like data analytical skills and things like that. Given that banking is broad, but also becoming certainly more technically driven in many ways, what are some of the, I'll call them more technical types of skills you would advise students to think about, at least beginning to develop, so that they can either become more attractive to the banking sector, or when they start, have more opportunity, hit the ground running, whatever term you want to use. Any thoughts on that, please?
Yeah, so this is something we talk about a lot, especially when we look into hiring, right? And this fits in very well for somebody that may be graduating in terms of skills that employers look for, right? So, as we talked about, whether it's with fintechs or whether with it's big banks that are trying to get more efficient with things, technology is playing a role that I feel like technology in the past used to be like, okay, I'm going into IT, right? So then because I'm going in IT, I need to learn whether it's programming or whether it's some sort of
Network management
language.
or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I feel like technology is just becoming another language that you need to know. I'm not going to say it's at the level of English, right? But it's becoming another language that you need to know, where if you're well versed in technology and potentially have picked up a programming language or two, right? Then you can go into a situation, encounter a problem, and say, hey, I have a very creative way at how we can solve this problem. So you're not necessarily on the technology side of the world, you're on the business side of the world, but you can still use programming languages on the business side of the world. Like, for example, we have in our group team members who are and Excel is one of those languages, one of those programs that everyone uses, but it wasn't really till I got in finance, and I would say even after 15 years of being at Wells, I would not call myself an expert at Excel. There's so much that you can do with Excel, and it's just an endless opportunities. And every time you find a new formula, it's like, wow, I didn't know I could do that. So they're like getting into VBA coding or SQL or picking up different languages, whether it be Python or C or C plus, or pick your favorite language that that you like most or it draws your attention most. You really don't have to become an expert at it, but if you could get well versed in it to a point where you could solve a problem, right? If you could solve a problem, and know enough about it to then continue learning, right? So I will be the first to say that there's many times where I've encountered an issue and I Google it, right? There's no harm in that. It's like an encyclopedia at your fingertips, right? So, but as long as you know what to look for, right? So then you can start looking for things, and you'll find that there's a huge community out there on various networks that are like, hey, I've encountered this, whether it be Reddit or any other, things that may be out there where they're like, yeah, I encountered this situation. Here's I solved it. Here's the keywords that I used, etc. But it's really in that drive for what automation, and improvement and efficiency. You're going to need to use some sort of technical skills to get ahead, right? So I would strongly encourage folks to pick up a language or two that kind of speaks to you. And once you pick one up, really, it's very easy to go from one to the other, because then it's less of it's more about just learning the differences and nuances and the keywords from one language to the next. But you've got the mindset down, right? So and when we really look into someone that is, for example, coming in with some sort of a programming language that they know, like an ideal candidate that sometimes I see is, like, for example, the person that has a finance background and maybe might have a minor in computer science, or may do some sort of like, hey, I built a website on my free time just because I wanted to do something, right? Or I built a program with something just because I was trying to solve a problem, and maybe this was part of my one of my college courses or my senior projects or whatnot. But it's really that really opens up your mindset of, okay, if your program doesn't work, for example, like, you have to problem solve of what's not working. You have to debug back into it, right? And find that code that's broken and find a way to solve it. So it really shows when someone has done that they have the problem solving skills, that they are creative in creating solutions, that they can potentially work on their own, they can be independent, right? And obviously they're technical, right? So all of those kind of, you start to check those boxes automatically as once you pick up some of those skills. So I would say I personally see that as something that everyone should hone as a skill on the side. And I would say regardless of whether you're in banking or really any other industry, that's just where things are going. We talked about fintechs, for example. Most jobs that are going to open up in fintech sort of companies are not going to be your teller jobs, right? That they don't have that. They're serving they're kind of technology first, finance second, right? So so for those sort of firms, for example, for anyone in the future that wants to go in those firms, it'll be important, or it will give you a leg up if you have some of that background. And I don't think it's something that has to be done in class. I think you can easily pick that up on the side. You can build a database and for fun, rather than doing it only for a class project, right? So like sometimes we try to give just creative examples to team members or potential candidates in an interview. And sometimes we'll say, like, okay, assume we're a nonprofit, right? And we get donations come in at random times. I want to know the fifth time that Dave donated something. How would you solve that for us? And what language or platform would you do that in, right? So it's technically a finance solution, right? I'm trying to find a fifth time that a customer or a donor, made a transaction, but I may need to use technology to get there, right? And if I have someone that just comes in with the business skills and no technological skills, they may say, well, I'm just going to count down the row of Excels and find the fifth time that Dave's name is there, but that might not be the most efficient way if you want to do that hundreds of times.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking as you were talking, a lot of our students, will take a course in Excel or something like that, but they're not really using Excel. I mean, they don't appreciate the power of macros. They don't appreciate the level of integration it has, where you can drive Word documents and all the other things that you can do. And I was also thinking, to solve some of the problems that I had encountered when we were doing research, ended up teaching myself R, which is a programming language akin to Python and all that. And what I found that it was really amazing, and I think this kind of speaks to your point, the last thing you said, which was, well, if you have to do it 1,000 times, the fact that you can create something that then creates as a routine that you don't have to replicate every time you do it, frees you up to do something else. And it also gives you a systems approach to how to address problems. You mentioned critical thinking, and I think it does that, from a systems perspective. So, that's the kind of thing organizations and banks or organizations, I think, benefit from, right? The fact that you can look at a system, come up with a better process and implement that.
Right.
Good.
And risk and control is on the top of, anywhere you go in banking, that will be one of the goals that will always be out there, that we always need to ensure that our risk is, we're all risk managers and we're controlling things properly. And the more you can automate things, the more you can put systems around them, the more you can structure them, the more your risk is controlled, right? So that is certainly on the top of most executives in the banking world.
So this has been great. So Jose and Rizwan, I want to thank you very much for giving us your time, giving us your thoughts, kind of helping us better understand this industry and some of the opportunities that lie in this industry. So I wish you guys a great evening. And again, thank you very much for participating in this. Thank you very much
for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.